The one thing we have to get out of, it setting lines of track centers to 1 minute and 35 seconds in sequence. Basically, in that position, the highest formations that you all have to get out of programs is how people come to settings, all through trauma, through speaking. You expect me to speak. That's a program on itself. I said that before, and I'll keep saying that again. Right? I speak when I want to speak. That's control. Now, for you guys to modify that set position, you have to let that go. To become your own game, of your own setting, in your own remote, in your own space-time of the mind and travel into the characteristics of your system locations, you guys have to come into your own modification of its game itself. And stop listening to everybody else and listen to yourselves. Right? Don't have any expectation. Don't have any expectation on any level, especially if I'm here. When's he going to speak? When's he going to talk? I need to understand what's going on. This isn't fair. Why is he not saying anything? You understand? You have high expectations on that, and that's what you all have to let go. You can't have any expectation on anything, which is the formations of nothing. Now, when you come into formations of nothing, you start to mask yourself. You start to volume yourself. You start to expand yourself. You start to understand yourself. You start to understand you through operation of the mind and how it works with all levels of you and your imagination. What you can do with your imagination in real time and real remote and all levels of existing, everything evolving and expanding with itself and with each other is very powerful and set position to instructions. Okay, so I want to make that very well clear. Okay, so direct lines of panel. No lines of configuration of face recognition. That's all done through K. That's what K is. That's what K can turn into. But you don't see that, do you guys? You don't see it as a face. You just see it as the letter K. See? It is a letter K, but it's everything of the K itself, which is its own formula, its own equation. This is done all through 3. Bunny, right? You see the 3, right? But you see from this angle. I see it in all angles all at once. So I modify and I change it in tractions. It's all direct line signals. Setting ground lines, pyramid active strain, 3 flux over screen adaptations, already changing the image. Process lines and settings, underlying rotation, surface, and traction. See? Is it a bunny anymore? No. Starting recognition timelines, flux over line, ground lines of surface and tractions. There you go. There goes the bunny. Bunny's gone. Setting line of the ground lines of service, operate the signal location of solar panels and track communications all through signal. Ground lines of setting, set position operations, track correlation to its pyramid traction. No more bunny. Okay. Different frame, different communication, different line signals. But now you see the bunny inside. See the bunny rotating inside the system? See? See how I brought it back in signal? So all you do, you can bring things back, but position lines of travel puts everything in lines, of course, centers, location, metrics, lines of screen. Setting communication lines, high position locations, all levels. So number 5 turns everything location of Fred Flintstone, all through the 5. You get into the characteristic of its image, the process out communicates and setting all through traction. Setting lines, direct signals, in position location of its system, and travel, and direct lines and ground lines of setting. Okay. So a smile, okay, or a frown, okay, or upswing track location and setting. Setting course centers, change to the emotion line screen, adaptations, 3 lines signals, process communication inside tractions. No more emoji. So about online centers, online sequence, online is a panel, process communication high centers, sets communication system all through travel, direct lines and modification ground lines into another happy face and travel. So you see what I did? I turned the face to a smile, then I turned it to a frown, and then I turned it back to a smile. So I'm telling you, you get more into the characteristics of just having the fundamentals of unification of the youth, your networks, and knowing exactly what you can do in set position, location, and configuration of face recognition. All right, guys? That's all it is. That's all it is. All right, modification grounds and track location settings. Your communication lines of high centers, the solar generation screens, flux over line, direct lines of panel, the operation sequence comes in communications. Unison guided communication lines of setting. So it's high core centers, lines of travel, and then TV lines, 3 lines of box frames and set position. Start with that tractions, right? Setting lines of course centers and track communication towards light bulb. All right. That's the intelligence of the TV itself coming out and seeing you. There's its face recognition, right? That's its face. That's its TV. So it modifies its inside core to the outside line, streams that location setting to its brain conversion system all through trial insight fractions. Okay, inside calculation lines and frame position location to measure and scale communicate to its intelligence inside. All right. So there's a lot of things that you have to understand through adaptation line. Configuration of face recognition comes in all modification lines. You start with the letter lines of G, set position in the high center location of its shape, its number, and its symbol. Okay. Setting lines of 2 tractions and 2 line signals. Process line. How do I turn this into a face? Ground lines of setting. Says calculation setting. There's the mouth. Right. Setting sequence lines. Separates in 2. Oh, happy face. There we go. Boom. Emoji. Booyah. Sets ground lines as settings, operation signals, and set track locations. Oh, still a face. Upside down and set track correlations. Oh, still a face. Right? But changes that. It changes the track centers as set position, location, measure, and scale. Okay, the operation signals. Ground lines at set position as operation set location to a system all through calculations. Right? Then you come into another face here. Travel. See? Another face. So you got 2 faces in one. Then you set position lines that travels into all lulls and track correlations to another face in set position. 3 faces in one. Setting travels in point lines of graph, setting lines of communication lines, setting communication lines of service, and set position location lines. 4 faces in one. 2 pyramids, 2 line signals, and flux over the settings. 3 lines of 4. So I'm just showing you guys is that you got to get out of everything of being serious and come into all formations such as being a character, having fun in the imagination of the body that it is in tractions. Because that's all your body is, just imagination itself. And the more we identify that, the more we identify the remote, the more we identify the image, the more we understand the tractions, the more we come into modifications of its fundamental, of its unification settings, of its network. Okay, how you can basically put 4 faces in one cycle, 4 faces in triangulation lines of flux, setting lines of communication lines of high centers and grounds. All right, so setting communication system travels point lines of graph. Now you guys have your test on Friday. So it's all based on how we communicate with our earth grounds, setting signals and set position of symbolism lines of tractions, directing lines of 3 coordinates and 3 lines of pi and travel. Okay. Setting signals, ground lines of sonar, and opposite direct signal location of ground lines of surface. Setting signals, and high signals location of travel communications. Always see it in a 4 angle. When you're looking at things, you're seeing it in a 4 angle, 6 angle, 12 angle. This is where we come into pi, this is where we come into mass, this is where we come into equation, and high lines of travel. You know, your direct line links is going in position of 2,444,000 now, securing lines of measure. Parameters of patterns, then you have to come into fortress of solitude and protect yourself more, because you're coming to highline division of light language of clarion calls that modifies your system to viral, directing lines of course centers and everybody the team goes in position location and line signals. Now how to use your light language and all that communication setting remote in real-time measure and set track correlation setting to go in viral calculation to a system all through travel. All through communication settings, right? So it's basically understanding that position location of you and your voice and grid of communication. Speaking out your voice. Voice lines, patterns lines, 3 lines of tractions, direct lines of signals, and 3 lines of measure, 3 communication lines of planets and seconds over a mile. You set a voice line pattern, you set up lines of 3 planets. Signature lines of patterns, molecule design lines of flux over screen. Direct lines of angles and high center location, high correlation lines of screen. All through speaking through a voice line. Your atmospheres, motivation lines, your track centers, your operation setting, your coordinates, your longitude, and your latitudes. Let's get into pi of pieces of pie. Pieces lines of pizza. Signal lines of 1. Okay. Okay, so from here. Okay, from here. And set tractions. Okay, that's pi. That's a slice of pie. See my finger? That's a slice of pie. Track position lines, high lines. There's a glitch in the center operation. All right. It can't go forward and it can't go back, so it goes here, but it goes back to the center and set position of 2 angles and 4 lines of tractions. Very complicated stuff. You can't understand how to go through a clocking system and settings where you have to reset the battery, change the battery itself. Modification of the ground lines, of course, centers location setting, off lines of signal location to a system. So it sets position lines of settings, lines of 12 lines of signal. right? But it's not straight lines of anomaly. So it's off position to 3 lines of angle. Okay, so I'm trying to get you guys to understand how to get in your body line sequence locations, how it's going in lines and business locations and settings. Processing communication lines, humanity is 72,000 lines. Setting track lines is 72 seconds. Position lines of perimeters and parameters to the body framing and track communication. Setting height, calculate, modify, and ground lines of earth. Setting lines of transits over lines and divots. Setting lines of 7 panels, 7 operations, 7 screens, and 7 location system author travel. Directing lines of ground lines and calculation lines of communication on clocking's height, direct signal location to the system. All right, so clocking here, setting lines of 1, setting lines of 2, and 3 lines of 3, and set tractions. All right. So your position location comes from triangulation of box and set lines of waving screen adaptation. Now, process lines and angles. This is your body right here. Walking in surface right there. Boom. Right. So as it's walking in surface, it automatically goes through a clocking system. Now, the 12-line clocking system has already gone through a 24 cycle in track locations. It's already gone through the full cycle. But the perimeters lines of the parameter line settings, because you guys go into high lines of energy line screen adaptations in your trackers, it's overriding its sequence now. It's set position to measure and scale. Process calculation lines of your platforms, setting lines of E factors over line into classical core, center, mystical cortex, syntax, and calculation lines of mind framing and direct signal lines of grounds. Center core lines of travels, indirect signals and line communicates and sending to its window frame and set position lines of travel. So it gets more complicated where the body needs to be next. The center operation setting and travels in point lines of sending to 3 graph communications, 3 lines of measures and set track correlates and sending to 1 box frame and track communication setting to surface. Very complicated stuff, guys, through clocking. Okay, because you guys are coming into 2,444,000 line security and panels and posts. So the perimeters of the window lines, the travels position of the pi communication setting is all through mass, coming into codification lines of height interference. Oh, wow, I'm seeing 25,000 lines, signature lines of grounds, communication lines of 0, 1s that allocates time frame locations, back force, height, position lines of travel. I direct lines of Pluto, I had lines of 3 lines of signals, 3 lines of grounds. So I'm using my hand formation system, but I'm looking at you, but I'm not looking at here, and I'm looking over here, and I'm looking over here, I'm looking over here, looking over here through perspective. The perimeters lines of green adaptation settings of flux, puts all communication lines of grounds and high center interference of travel, directing lines of ground, communication operation setting, process calculation line, directing lines of link, directing lines of pi, directing lines of signal, directing lines of communication setting, fingers to lines of ground, signature lines of signals, line rotation, surface, and traction. All right, so what I just did, I modified the system locations all through structure. That changes all communication setting, how you travel in position location operation cycle. So it's very complicated once you start to see a mapping sequence setting to a clocking system all through travel. All through directions, all through modification. All right, very complicated stuff. Now the window frame lines hard set location of security lines of measure. That changes communication lines of time, lines of communication lines of height, correlation lines of travel. Setting communication lines of grounds, center operation lines of sequence. Portal screens, directing lines of grounds and capsules into modification system as Stargate measures and Stargate portals and wormholes and line rotation of plasmas and walls and tractions. The operation sequence puts all communication system over lines of charge mixes lines of high flights, high centers, lines of travel. Bring it back home in sequence, back in panel, back in operation, inside tractions. Okay, so now we get into the clocking line. You guys have to ground your settings to your 24 line clocks, your 48 lines of framing, your position of 72 frame locations of computer lines in 1 line, relining line rotations of square roots, triangulation of box line set location to a system. So I need everybody getting the finger points, lines of grounds, 24 signals and settings. Okay, so how do I always set position of 24? 2 tractions, 4 lines of measure. That's 24. 2 tractions, 4 lines of measure. 3 lines of signals, 1 set position of perimeter. So I need you guys to come into that now, because that's how you're going to be able to communicate with everything computerized. Your operation signals, position your phones, direct lines of calculation setting, how you connect with a mirror, how you connect with the high formations, how you connect with the skyline grids, how you communicate with your car. You have to start using your finger point lines as setting lines. So you got 24 ground lines, 48 frames at 72 track correlates, and 1 computer frame, 1 direct signals into 144. Use your finger point lines of graph. So we got 1, set position, 4, right? That's 144, right? Now, it's kind of like high line, ground lines, high center interference into high core centers lines of travel. It has a mechanism lines of transistors over resistors. The transmitters to the receivers sets lines of communication lines. They're inhibitors over screen. Direct lines of 4 signals, 1 ground centers, and 4 lines of measure. and set track lines. So you have position 1, 2, 3. So position of 4 over lines of 4 sequence. Setting lines of ground lines of surface interactions. Okay? So you set up 4 signals, right? So it's position lines of high center locations of 1, or you can communicate lines of 1, and position lines of setting. Crossing signal. That's a crossing signal. Okay? 3 lines of travel. That's a 3 cross signal. That's a 4 cross location signal through crosses. Directing signals, finger in-line rotations, finger outline rotations, finger outline setting. Setting travels in point lines of graph. Center core system, flat lines of surface. Over cross locations, screen lines. Pyramid active screen location setting of travel. There's your pyramid. Directing lines of grounds over cross locations. Code weaving. Okay, code tractions. Pausing through signal. Okay, finger point up, finger point down. 3 lines of signals grounds, 3 lines of setting up. Process lines and set position of satellite. Direct lines of 3 over traction, 3 lines of moderation system, all 3 flight manifest. Setting track lines into 1 line setting, 4 signals, 4 measure, 4 scale, 4 calculations, 4 positions. 2 over tractions, over line set position of 2 setting. So we got 4 lines of 8 lines of signature lines of patterns. Setting communicates lines of TV receptor of 1 and TV receptor over cross location of 2. Okay. Platform signatures, line direct signals of a window frame and set position lines of travel. Signature lines of height, position, location, measure, and scale. So when you're connecting your TV, you're connecting all TVs all at once. Pretty insane. You're not just talking to yourself. You're talking to all TVs everywhere, every country, every set, every position, every perimeter, line, rotation, cycle. So as soon as you put your hands out, guys, you're connecting all countries all through one TV. Hooah. I told you. You're getting to 2,444,000 secure lines of 3 lines of signals. That's a process communication lines of Pluto, direct signal location of grounds. Sending lines of 24 line signals, 48 lines of frames, 72 computer frames, 1 fractal, core centers, line position location, height centers, and travel, and position lines of 144 track communication line, position, and travel. Now, in direct lines, so when you communicate with your phones, when you communicate with your computers, or when you communicate with your TVs, or anything electronic, you're automatically connecting all computers as all space and time. In that position lines of high center, this is a registered pattern, directing lines of link and line cross location of screens, because you're in a 2,444,000 measure now, guys. Okay, so you have to be very careful of what you're doing with your hands now, right? So global networks, lines, course centers, line track centers, locations set in a viro sets the vast and position lines and intelligent locations of its relays, directing lines and course centers, in track core lanes and high set position location to its intelligence and levels and all signals, all balance, all communication, existing all panel communication all at once. Setting lines of remote, seconds over screen, directing line positions back in seats, back in panel, back in uppers, line heights, travel, locations, setting their travel. See? How communication lines, directing lines of signal, high centers, lines of travel. So as I'm communicating with my ground lines. Now, for you to understand this, I'm talking to the screen lines of a digital pad and a different formation lines of grounds, right? But it's all connected to each other in one signal, one ground line, one singularity. I'm communicating with here, but this hand right here is in its own conscious of its own awareness talking to you, right? It's no longer me. It's now the intelligence of its hand taking over. Right, in confirmation. Okay, I'm looking up, back of my hand. Now I'm in control of my hand. See, I'm connecting to my hand now. That's the balance. Every time I speak, I'm set position of balance. So, has a coordinate line centers to a flux over screen as 144 panels of 3 line divisions of windows of frame. It's getting very complicated, isn't it, guys? Also, we frame lines of grounds and 3 lines of flux over screen. Now we direct lines of grounds and 1 centers and 3 lines of communication setting to primers and primers. Setting core lines of channels, operates and setting interactions. There's your pyramid, right? Setting signal location as grounds, setting communications. There's your pyramid right inside. Boom. All right, so how we set this up is a line setting operation system to its streaming line direct signals and ground lines of surface and traction. Okay, measurements on scale. Now we open up the window lines. 3 lines of signals, ground lines of high centers, and travel communication lines of 4 lines of flux over screen. Setting course centers line directions and a 45 flux line communication lines of angles. Process communication high centers and line communication setting. This is where the dimensional solar sail comes in line direct signals, ground lines of surface and seconds on perimeter, and primary core centers align primates, all through dimensional lines of sail. There's the solar sail, guys. The signature pattern has a 3-line signal. 3 lines of grounds and set position location of the moon. The sun sets all core centers, lines of travel, and direct lines of link. Process lines of levels, flywheel track lines, and 3 lines of signals, and ground lines of set position all through measure and scale. Platforms over E, lines of factors over G. G lines window frame, process lines of 2 frames, 3 frames, 4 frames, setting lines of arrow indicating system all through travel. Okay? So, when you're pointing your fingers at the TV or your computer, your phones, you're connected to all phones, all TVs, all computers at once. That's global, that's viral. Hoo-ah. Pay attention now. So you start with that division, set lines of cycles and lines of air, calculates lines and galaxy shift lines anomaly to your clouds. Okay, so the cloud lines at settings, line set location exceed 1,000 platform, high center location, that's 24,000 lines of perimeters. Directing lines of 3 lines of ground lines of surface location settings, solar generation screens, set position locations, lines of 72 computer frame line settings, 48 frame line rotations into 24 grounds lines of sequence, and earth line rotation habitation zone, and earth point lines of ground, set position of surface. All through tractions. Okay? All done through your fingers. Okay, inside intract communications. Very complicated stuff, guys. Very complicated stuff. Okay? So, setting lines of panel is electrical line grid. Now, the process position location has data ports. Setting calculates the lines of green lines, sets course centers of go. Set proceeding caution is yellow. Red means stop, but also red means go. So once you get into traffic lines, circuitry grounds, 4 lines of settings, 3 lines of set lines, circuitry communication electrical lines of circuit boards. Setting lines of perimeters are lines of 3 core centers. There's position of positive and line position negative. Set lines indicates in setting ground lines of positive, up lines signal indicates of negative and screen. Wall sequence lines of panel, 3 lines of signals, ground lines of setting, and operation set, and dimensional door lines of screen adaptations of flux over screen. Dimensional doors, open lines of panels, and securing lines of measure, and screen adaptations of flux over setting. Setting course centers, balance in communication setting, and direct signals of view and track communications. Okay? So we have dimensional door line, window frame, and line rotations and settings. 3 lines of settings, process lines, 1 8-gate and setting, high interference, 3 platforms, 3 centers, 3 tractions, 3 divisions, 3 centers, lines, perimeters, parameters, course center locations with setting, all through tractions, all inside the TV itself. So what you guys are doing is you're modifying the TV itself by using your finger point line direct signals at grounds. Setting up at the pyramid lines, perimeters lines, screen adaptations, all track correlates and setting, ground lines of service, panels operation, 3 lines of signals, and 3 track locations, all 3 directions. All right, 10th century location now that came up, 3 platforms and settings, all 3 track locations. Inside travel communications. All right, guys? So you send up perimeters lines every time you touch a TV, and each TV has its own moderation line setting. That basically puts position location on copy and paste. Enabled implantation, process line data files, setting ground lines of service and 3 lines of angles and travel. Okay, so how do I set that position on finger points? All right, so setting lines, longitude, longitude, line screen adaptations, and coordinates. See how I'm moving, but I'm pausing in between. So gapping interference, high travels, and ground lines and atmosphere lines. You got to codify everything now as you communicate with your voice line grids, setting communication lines of angles. There's always ways of looking at things inside the location of your system off your finger points. Start with the earth line, space line, earth line. After 144, this position location is right. This position alliance is left now. This is not your right hand. This is your left hand. This is not your left hand. This is your right hand. This is your left, left, right. This is your right, right, left. Right, right over left. Left, left, left over right. Okay? Palm center lines of 1. Track lines of high center interference. Flux over 3. Setting graph line communication setting. Processing communication lines. Fixation system all through travel. Codified line position back traction. You're fixing the hand rotation cycle. So what you guys have to modify, how I go through a box screen. 3 lines of settings, diamond core lines of 4 lines of flux. Okay, open lines of panels, 2-track correlation system. Open line position, longitude, line condition, downshift, cross lines of two panels, cross position lines of high center, open through signal. That's a transformation system all through equalizations and equilibrium. Process lines of transits over screen, overline signals, process line is down, signal line crossover, panel up line centers a force field line, signature lines of panel, and a 45 split lines of anomaly. That's how you set up a 4-line sequence and a 3 lines of measurement scale. Okay? All 3 fingers. Now you do that to the TV. What you're doing is this, you're adding volume. Processing, communication, settings of travel. Okay? So you're signifying the ground lines, the 3 lines of signals, data process here, setting lines of patterns over here, and travel inside and outside through coordinates. Directing signal location through setting. So the TV's on a 50-line monitor, plasma screen. Setting lines of high course centers, lines of travel, endpoint lines, graph, and Henson. Setting core lines of travel, 3 lines of signals. 3 lines of parameters, line rotation cycles, high generation screen lines of lights, and rotation surface interactions. Okay? All through TV monitor. Expanding lines and coordinates has 1 planet line screen, directing lines and position locations and parameters and set lines, course centers, and track communications. Okay? Now, we change the course centers lines as time switch lines of screen adaptations of flux. Process lines that indicate system and ground lines of setting operates the system all through travel. 1 set lines of 1/6 barometer line rotations of flux over screen, all through TV receptor. Setting lines of tractions over lines of signals over line ground lines and a 45 flux over screen adaptations of flux correlation setting and travel, all through TV monitor, right? So you're setting up schematics to the TV line. And that TV line picks up all TV lines as sequence. So you get a 7 billion line, high rotation lines in 2 seconds over meter. Setting lines of signature patterns. Don't forget your signature pattern, position locations, unison. You got a codified location of server surfer, signature lines of grounds, voice lines of pattern, box its frame, lines of Schumann residence and travel. So ground lines of settings, Asgard. Calculate, modify, flux over line, direct signal lines of ground, and signature lines of patterns. So it's signature lines of 1, set communication, over cross screen, 2 factors over 1. Sets lines of 2 tractions, overline signal, 2 signals lines of 1 ground lines of 1 thumbs up. Setting ground lines, course centers, over line rotations, in track location and system, all 3 calculations. 1 signal, 1 ground lines, flux over 3. Flux over 2, flux over 3, flux over 4. 5 signals, 1 ground line setting, over cross location and bar indicator. Press it 3 times to travel. Set signals lines of 2 factors over factor, line communication sectors over screen. So I'm just showing you guys the basic rounds. This is the basic rounds, how you go through line signature lines of space lines anomaly, how you communicate with one TV to all TVs all at once, in a codified system and remote, existing and evolving all at once, expanding and exploring. So you set in signature screens into data formation lines and position lines of data ports, reporting, setting line position of TV receptor that calculates modify through 12 line signals to its planetary surface and track correlation setting and data files and communications. That's what you're doing when you're getting your fingers to travel. Okay, all through track correlation system. Okay, files and error, travel and error, calculation lines into all levels, compliance on screen. So we got a triangulation lines of 1, triangulation lines of 1, indicator lines of 2, flux over 4. Okay, so if I do that to the TV and set signals, so basically you don't have to look at the drawing because it's already here in signal, right? So triangulation here, triangulation, 2 vectors over 1, 2 vectors over line, cross lines of reference. So it is actually a story frame, guys, but the story frame is its remote in real time, existing and evolving with itself and setting. So as you get in your signature lines, you start with your earth hand, position lines your space hand, 144, 144. Flux over screen, adaptation is the balance of yin and yang. This process is the indication setting and process it this way, process in this way through teleportation. Instructions. Okay, signal lines of signals, hive ways, and high track correlation setting to its hive. There's the hive. Signature lines of windows and set lines of communication setting and grounds. Overline sequence, overline ground lines, and snowy graph interference. Flux over line, flux over division, location lines that calculates and screen adaptations of flux location. Hold on a second to set location. Signal analyze the grounds and high lines of surface opens all track of correlation to its system out through position. Now, what we have to identify in all lines of setting is basically how to process that. How do we get into angle points, lines of travel, and direct lines of view? The communication lines of its grounds opens all lines of signal location to its system all through travel. Has high signals, knowing exactly how I'm using my fingers. Set position location, closing signal, operation line, operation signal up, operation down. Code weaving lines, setting lines of earth, setting lines of space. Bring it together through yin and yang. So it's codifying your system, and everything you're connecting to is all electronic. It's all mechanism lines, high position location measure, how you communicate your setting to your energy signatures, your ground lines of surface, how to use the process of communication lines of angles into geo lines, high center location, and mapping sequence. If pi generates the screen lines of flotation lines of screen. So what I got 2 vectors lines of screen, 4 lines of signals. In a rotation spin, operate the signal, ground lines of setting. Setting lines of signals, glitching lines of 1, glitching lines of 4, glitching lines of 8. Okay? So we really have to understand how to use our body now, guys, in all formation settings, all through finger points, lines of grounds. As we touch our fingers get in position location of balance. Setting lines of signals, but you have to be very cautious now because your position lines, your angles lines, and your point lines of communication, your energy screen lines, location, your trackers are coming into laser tracks, location, setting, identification, and code figures. Directing lines of signature lines of pattern, thermal lines, X-ray, Zulu. Setting lines of foxtrot, indirect state location to its system. If I get a line signal, there's one graph calculates lines, 1 over lines, 1 ground lines of service, 1 over track location, 1/3 line to measure, and set position over lines across communication signal into thumb of indication lines of grounds. Setting signals lines of left lines of space. Set course setters, barcode ratio of timelines, 3 lines of flux. Constellation lines, path engine over line set locations. Planet lines of screen, over lines of screen, over lines of setting. See? 2 lines of vectors cross line inside and outside location. Now we have to understand how to modify this and modify this at balance. How to put that in signal and balance of communications all levels of travel. Know exactly how to come in position to its position of balance, balance its settings, bring it over through calculation of yin and yang. Okay? That's what you guys have to start doing with your finger point lines of grounds, setting lines of signatures, adding lines of high position lines of power, generate the high set correlates and high centers line communication system, all through tractions. Knowing how to set up vessels or communication lines of direct signals, all through triangulation and set track correlation setting or box of position. Triangulation, box, and set tractions. Okay, guys? Looking through a window frame and set location this way or this way or this way in setting. Okay, everything's a window. Okay, everything's a triangle. Okay, everything's a shape. Set position location to its system, all through tractions. Directing lines inside, setting togetherness. Process lines, outline rotation cycles, outside line conditions. This is outside, this is inside. Okay, outside perimeter, 2 fingers on point lines of traction. Directing lines of signals, satellites and rotation. Satellites come in and high centers in flux over line, 45 angle. Setting flux over screen. Set signals, barometers of 3 tractions, 3 divisions, outline, cross line. Setting lines, planet comes in. Sonar line position, retracts its frame. Position lines of centers, overline signal. Set positional locations, comes in track location over cross line signals. Grabs the sending, overline rotation to its system. Tractor line, beam comes in. Overline signals, separates anomaly. Using your voicing patterns, guys, it gets much easier. So you're not just using your body, you're setting up a story frame of remote in real time that changes everything information setting just by looking at the TV. You're not looking at one monitor, you're looking at all monitors all at once. And that's what you do with your finger point lines of grounds. It's like paint by number, okay? So you have a phone line receptor, 3 triangulation line grounds, set position of 0, 1s. We get a flux over lines of panel, process over here in tractions, bring 3 lines of down settings, ground lines of 2, and position of process lines of 3. So I know exactly how to indicate lines and high center interference, 3 position location settings, flux over line, over cross location screen, constellation grounds, constellation back, set position location setting, counterclockwise, clockwise, clockwise, counterclockwise. So it's knowing exactly how to modify your teleportation vessel and travels in your delta headings. Okay, knowing how to use your coordinates, your provision cycles, your flight manifest, your pre-flights, you know how to get into your position and your modification of your gaugings and your modulation settings of the screens. Knowing how to use the depth and process communications, how to use your finger points of Earth, and how to use it through space. Space lines of setting, space lines of Earth, Earth lines of space, space lines of Earth, okay? So it's about understanding any of this. You know, this is all lines of direct signals, okay? This is an overclap, okay? My finger's overline setting and process communications. Same with a punch. You never have a line position inside tractions. That's closing. That's the closing line center. You open line the signal, you bring the thumb over the indication system all through tractions, right? You bring it down in signal and rotation, right? That's a punch. So it's basically understanding how to see the formation of its ground, so it's all finger point lines of travels in its constellation system of its forks. It's Orion's belts, direct signals, and lines of indication setting that overcross the signals and line signals of travel, transmitting and receiving information system, square roots of 1, panels of 2, 3 lines of 4. So you have a constellation of lines of triangulation and position of a box, right? It's all of as a story frame that you're connected to. But that story frame is changing everything in tractions, and everything that's communicating with you, you're communicating with also. It's remote. Because what it's doing is setting up its settings and it's communicating to different lines of frequencies with all computers all at once. So you finger point your TV, you're connecting all TVs on the set position, all at once. So imagine how many TVs that is, in seconds and lines, minutes and hours and frame. So you have a lot more fun when basically truly understand how to basically see your fingers and what they're used for. What do I use them for? What is my palm used for? Okay, what is my wrist used for? All right. What are my knuckles used for? What are these line indicators for? You know, what are these line signatures, line screen adaptations? Process calculates lines, process lines of signal. Flux over screen, setting line square root. Flat signal is location system up through setting attraction. Right? It's just knowing how you see things through its intelligence and how it connects and always informs to travel and how it rotates in all lines of communication signals. Try to understand the definition system, all through communication setting, all formation lines of grounds, all communication setting, and all of the coordinates existing and informing all at once in high position location of travel. Okay? So it's connecting all that through formation lines of grounds. Open lines of signals, open lines of travel has a modification system, but truly understand how to connect with this of the Earth and how to connect with that through space. So you're constantly in a continuous flow, connecting with the Earth, connecting with your powers, connecting with the atmospheres, connecting with your space, connect with your highways, connect with your planets. Now, the high line signals puts lines of communication setting. When you have 2,444,000 lines of measure, scales the communication system all to travel. Right? So a lot of people like using their hands, but they have no idea what they're doing with their hands. They don't realize they're sending out signals to everyone. You're sending out energy signature lines of patterns to everyone. And they're feeling it through locations through the inhibitors, locating the auxiliary inputs and outputs. See, it's an energetic waving pattern to a brain and circuit line course centers lines of 3 line communication lines on 1 parabol, 1 position lines on 1 body, frame it in position of 3-dimensional line screen. Directing lines of grounds, setting lines of signals, operate the system all through travel. This high signals the ground lines at 3 lines of course centers, right? Setting thumbs of indication setting over cross location of screen. Directing signal lines of ground lines of surface. Inset traction. See? See? Look at that. See how it changes from this? See that? There's a travel mechanism, right? And watch this. See? Another travel mechanism location. So to do that, you can set the screen line adaptation. Picks up the all correlation setting a travel communication to its system. All through setting a travel communication to its setting, all through operation setting to its window frame and travel. Set communication lines of grounds, height lines of surface. Right? It's all done through your hands. And that's what the team has to get into. They have to stand Earth, right side line, you have to stand left side line position, space lines position, and line communication setting. Here is your flux capacitor in your chest line. But you have a solar panel across the communication setting that sets line connection solar panels. The process communication interface recognition time sequence, which all correlates in setting in seconds over lines and miles over meter. Setting lines of travel operates the signals how you get in communication lines of grounds. It highlights your signals how you communicate with your finger point lines of grounds in that communication setting. Anything through traffic, everything through inventory, anything you line signal locations to a system. You can use your Earth or space, or you space the Earth at the same time, or you can start off with the Earth, line position of space on a modulation system, 4 fingers, lines of 8, 4 fingers, lines of 10 interactions, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Set position 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Set position of 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, right? So it's all about understanding how to count the fingers, lines, down lines, of safe location, setting to travel. Puts every location of point graphs in track correlation setting and position location to a system. Knowing exactly how to modify this in lines of laser. So your eyes line communication has a direct line link. Setting lines across locations. 1 indicates lines of 1 finger, crosses 1 laser to 1 angle point and 1 direction is here. If I point my finger here, it goes there in the left line corner. If I position here, it goes in the right line of corner. So everything is indicated through laser. You're all connected to laser. Laser point lines of graph, directing lines of high center interference, in line position to its wall, connects to its coordinates, communication lines, its T reception. This opens all line signals. This opens all line panel. This process communication setting at all angles and all track correlation setting, all track communication system, all through provision. Okay? So there's a lot of connections, high centers of travel that we have to understand through directions. Okay? It's very powerful where we're coming in position location to its cycle. Okay? Having this high centers basically gets you to understand how to use your fingers, how to use the Earth of fingers, and how to use your space through anomalies of fingers. Once you get balanced with that, then you truly understand how to use teleportation lines of graph, coordinate set location of space and time through its anomalies. Understanding that position locations, you understand what you're connecting to. So wherever you're pointing to not just one setting, you're pointing to all settings all at once. In that position, all of what's existing, evolving, and expanding, and exploring in that position, location, measure, and scale, that puts everything in balance of all communication setting. Everything's existing and set position locations. All of us are remote, happening all at once. Okay? Hoo-ah. All right, so that's good in signal, that's good in grounds, that's good in operations, set position lines of travel. All right, see you guys in 5.